Welcome to How to Sell More. Today we're discussing how to get started in content marketing with John Egan, the author of the new book, The Stripped Down Guide to Content Marketing. I'm Mark Traeger. Let's get into it. So John, you wrote the book, The Stripped Down Guide to Content Marketing. So I'm so excited to have you here because content marketing covers a massive array of different tactics and different strategies. It's its own thing. So help us understand, in your opinion, right now, what is the most effective way we should be looking at content marketing for our businesses?
Well, I always tell people you really need to look at where your audience or potential audience gets their information or gets their entertainment. Whatever platforms they're on, that's where you need to be. So if you've got heavy users of YouTube, then you need to be on YouTube. If you think that your content would resonate with people who love newsletters that come in the email, then go for that. The same method, the same kind of content's not going to work for every single business or organization.
You mentioned that go where the people are for entertainment, but let's say I'm a B2B business, or I'm maybe a service, or I'm a product that's not quite so B2C focused. And so if my customers are on YouTube for entertainment, do they want my corporate message? Are they looking for that?
Well, by entertainment, I mean more like being amused about something, not necessarily like, I want to watch a cat video. Although if you're selling cat food, that might be a great place to start. If you're not, then cat videos might not make much sense. So it really depends on who your audience is. If it's a B2B audience, then they're probably going to be more interested in, how can I make more revenue? How can I improve my processes? Things like that can move their business forward.
You have this framework that really helps break down to make sure that your content is working as hard as you do, to help be able to make sure that your content is generating leads for you, that you're able to build larger audiences and grow your audience, and then ultimately that this is all going to lead to sales that helps your bottom line. Can you break down for us the best way we should be approaching content marketing in our businesses? Because I think most of the listeners know about it. Most of the listeners understand that there's blogs and there's videos and there's social and there's all these different things. But in my experience, unless you have a really great team and you're really focused on execution, it's all these sporadic things and you're never quite connecting the dots in such a way where you can actually go like, this is how I'm making money for my efforts.
There is some trial and effort, and that's where the sporadic nature might come in. But I would say that, you really need to figure out what works for you and what works for your audience. So if blog posts resonate with your audience, and that's something that you're easily able to do on a regular basis with a regular cadence, then go with that, because it can be effective. Now, I will say that, whether it's videos or audio or blog posts, whatever it may be, you really need to be consistent with it and not just do it haphazard. You need to be committed to it. It's kind of like a marriage. You need to commit to each other. So you need to commit to whatever that kind of content is. A lot of people get great traction from video these days, whether it's short form on something like TikTok or longer form on YouTube. But maybe you don't have the resources, or maybe that's just not where your audience goes to get their information. Now, if you're doing more how-to kind of stuff, that does make more sense on YouTube, especially if you're able to show something and demonstrate it rather than just talking about it.
Okay, so I hear consistency all the time. And I get it. I understand it. And yet I know that when I put stuff out, for example, no one's waiting. No one's like, ooh, it's Tuesday. And on Tuesday, Mark drops, this blog post, or if you're doing it for SEO reasons and you're putting out, a few posts per day, or you're following the thing where it's like post on LinkedIn 4 times a week. Like I know that no one out there is like, they wake up in the morning, they get out of bed, they look at their phone and they're like, today's the day that someone is dropping a piece of content. So help me understand, because it just doesn't feel that important to me, consistency. Why is consistency so important?
Well, if you're not doing it, then you're not getting any traction.
Yeah, okay. So it's like something is better than nothing is what you're saying.
You need to be in the game. It's like if you're playing football and you're not on the field, then you can't score a touchdown. It's just, it's basic math in terms of, 1 + 1 = 2. If you've got content and you've got, an audience for it, then they can consume your content. So it doesn't have to be rigid. If you miss a week, I don't think people are going to be crying about it, but it's sort of like when in the old days when you had your newspaper delivered to your house.
I remember when I started my job, I actually got a newspaper delivered to my house because when I was like 22 or 23, I thought this is what grown-ups do. And then I found, man, I'm just never reading these things. I'm just throwing them out all the time.
But if you didn't get it back in the day, you were pissed off because you didn't get it. And you were calling the newspaper saying, where's my newspaper? Now, times have changed, obviously, and you can get information from all sorts of sources, but you never know when somebody might be missing your content. And there are certain emails I get every day from certain news sources and certain people that I make sure I try to open. There aren't very many, but you could be in that special category if you do your content right, do it well, and do it consistently.
And so how should we be thinking of content? Because I get overwhelmed sometimes when I go, you mentioned tip number one is to make sure that we understand which platforms our audiences are on and the types of content they like to consume. Okay, so that's step one. Step two, we got to be consistent and we got to play to the areas that are our greatest strengths. So if we're strong on video or you're strong on talking, I talk a lot. I'm really comfortable this way. If you're better at writing or maybe photography or memes or you're funny or whatever, maybe you're going to play to those strengths. I can think of content in terms of like, okay, by platform breakdown, and then I got to create all these different things. Or I could just think of content like, I just want to make stuff that people will like to read. Or there's SEO, or there's, gated stuff, which I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about. There's all these different ways to think about it. How do you prescribe that we approach this if either we're not doing it or it's just really kind of scattershot right now?
You need to have a plan, and it doesn't need to be set in stone, but you need to figure out, okay, we're going to aim for 2 blog posts a week, or whatever kind of content you're talking about. Map it out and figure out now what kinds of questions, what kinds of concerns do people in our audience have. I write a lot of content for clients about how to get a mortgage or how to get a car loan or things like that. So you're answering questions, you're addressing a need they have, and you want to make sure you're in there somewhere. Now, it can be a little more soft and maybe you're enlightening people and it's more thought leadership rather than answering a question. But you need to give them something to grab onto and say, this is worth my time to consume. There are times when you really do need to do trial and error. It's like, okay, blog posts, they're working great. Video, not so much. Then why keep doing video? Why keep spinning your wheels? Don't do video if that's not where you're getting traction. Or maybe try a different format, but don't just, one of the things I talk about in my book is failing quickly. And that's something I learned from one of the startups I worked at. You don't just have to keep beating yourself over the head, trying to figure out, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? At some point, you just got to let go.
So you mentioned blog post working, YouTube not working. I know that each channel and each type of content is going to have its own kind of key performance indicator, the measurement you're going to use to make sure it's working or not. What are you looking at to know whether a blog post is working or not? I mean, I start there because I write a lot of blog posts. And I've been in marketing for over 15 years and I consider myself a pretty smart person, but still sometimes I look at it, I'm like, I don't know. Am I looking at average page time? Am I looking at bounce rate? Like there's a lot of numbers. And the more you get into it, the more you're like, I don't know if I know what I'm doing.
Well, I try to let the SEO people do the minutia as far as looking at those statistics. And I try to focus more on, are people sharing it? Are people discussing it? Are you getting feedback about it? There are all sorts of ways to measure that without being really hardcore numeric about it. Now, that it is important to look at how much traffic are we getting? Are people spending time on our website? Are they sharing it? All sorts of things that you can measure very, very well with Google Analytics and a whole bunch of other tools. That's not the only way you should look at it. And sometimes you just don't know when a blog post or a video or a meme or something is going to take off. That's, again, why you should be trying and being consistent so that you can score those wins and you can figure out, okay, what works well, and rinse and repeat that rather than being like, okay, well, that was great. What do we need to do now? Well, why don't you look at what you just did that did really well and see if you can replicate that in some other form.
It's great to me that you actually went to engagement, because I think when we're starting off or when we're trying to fix things, often we can get lost in the numbers. And if you don't have a great SEO team, or if you don't have someone who has set up all of the like really weird filtering and details that GA can have and all of these other things, that's Google Analytics, then sometimes you can just look at numbers and you don't know how to read it. So engagement's interesting to me. Now, if you're in a lower engagement field or industry or something and you get like 4 comments on something, and then you do something else and you get 0 comments, like, is that enough of an indicator to you? Like, hey, this is pretty good because it got something?
If you're in a niche market, you may not have a gigantic pool of people. I was just on a plane the other day and somebody had a bag about a blood disorders conference. Well, that's a very small pool of people who are interested in going to a conference about blood disorders. But if you're capturing a healthy percentage of the people who might be interested in that conference, then you've done your job. It doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, we got 1,000 shares on that. If you get 50, that may be good enough as a percentage of your total pool of people.
Now, the person who's organizing and leading the blood disorder conference. So I just imagine this, that, there's themes and there's all this stuff, but I can infer that it's probably a health professional, they're in a health industry or what have you. Now, they're probably super passionate about this. And if I was an entrepreneur in this space, I would go like, it's not enough that the people in our industry are coming to our blood disorder conference. Like, I need everyone to know about this. Like, I need middle America to know about it. And I need all of these people to know about it. And we get like so caught up, I guess, our passion and evangelizing what we want to talk about. Is it realistic that content marketing can help us take this? Let's use this example of the blood disorder conference. Can it take it far and wide, or is it always better to go like, listen, it's such a niche thing, it's such a small population, let's just go as deep as we can within our niche as possible, as opposed to trying to now take on like all the other things that are health related when this is such a specific topic?
Why would you want to go to all those other people?
Because I want to win.
What are they going to get out of it? Are they going to come to the conference? Are they going to, talk about what you're doing? Probably not. I asked one of the people who attended this conference, I said, it sounds like a lot of fun, being sarcastic. And she goes, actually, it was a gentleman I talked to, but a woman I talked to who also had been to the conference basically said the same thing, that it was a really good community, that was a strong community to be part of. That's what you need to look for. You need to tap into that passion, and you need to figure out who your community is. And you don't need to go outside your community. It's like if a news website in St. Louis tried to cater to people in Chicago. That's a mismatch.
When you put it that way, it's actually so clear.
Yeah, don't focus on Chicago, focus on St. Louis, because that's what your market is.
Oh, I like that.
You don't have to be everything to everybody.
The reason I bring up these questions is because in my experience as an agency owner, and I spend a lot of time working with business owners in different groups, we keep bumping into the same thing. Everybody wants to take over the world. And when you say, like, hey, if you're not in Chicago, why are you focused on the Chicago market? It makes total sense. I can recall an entrepreneur who wanted to work with us once, who had come up with a doll, a whole toy set. And they named each character of the toy set after a different chronic ailment. And I said, unless if you're going after, because we have to target parents to buy the toys. And so you need the parents to buy into it, and they got to buy it for their kids. And then their kids have to be into it. So really you're going after like parents who are like really into this health thing. Like, it's so niche. They're like, I don't think so. And I won't name the toy, but it had to do with like cholesterol. So imagine a girl doll where the first name starts with something that would then work with cholesterol, like, and it's this doll and it's this doll. And I'm like, I'm just not sure what parents would want to go to the store, and between all the different things they can buy, they're going to purposefully buy this doll named after this thing so their kid will play with it, so they can normalize the fact that cholesterol is something. I'm like, it's just too niche. I don't think anyone will do that. And they got so offended. They got so offended with me because I said, go so deep with the health groups where some people will, but don't try to get the person in like, Cincinnati who's never thought about health before, whatever. I'm being general now, but like, don't go after like the group who's never thought about health and hope that somehow, because it's a toy, you're going to win.
Yeah, you can go too broad. That can get you into trouble, because you really need to keep your eyes on the prize. And that is your community, your audience, I worked in PR, and I would invariably had somebody say, oh, we want to get in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Why can't we just focus on something that's winnable first? That's kind of like the grand prize. But if we get coverage in, let's say, your market is Texas. If you get in all the business journals in Texas, that's a huge win. And you don't necessarily need the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. And you may get buried in all the other coverage they have, whereas you might get more zeroed in, better coverage from that more localized news outlet.
Oh, such good advice. Now, before we jumped on the recording, you were talking about gated content. Now, I mean, I've known about this and we've done this with clients for years and years. So it's nothing new, but it still seems like something that people struggle with. So how can we leverage gated content in what is this, but how can we leverage it in such a way to generate leads for our businesses?
I think one of the important things to remember about gated content is you need to provide something of value. I download a lot of gated content, and usually I'm looking for data and insights. If you have proprietary data and insights that aren't secretive, that aren't going to get you in trouble and your competitors are going to know, oh, that's what they're doing, you've got gold. There's gold there that you can share. As long as it's presented in an attractive, easy to understand format, then you've got a winner there. And so you post it on your website or LinkedIn or wherever, and then somebody downloads it. But in order to download it, they must provide their name, their email address, their title, their company, maybe their phone number, and then you've got some leads that you've generated. It's really hard sometimes in content marketing to attach leads to the content. Gated content's a great way to be able to attach those two. It's even harder to attach the revenue to the content because you can't always say apples to apples, like, well, we got this amount of revenue from this piece of content. It doesn't work that way. You really need to look at your brand reach, your brand authority, your domain authority on your website. Are you getting more traction, more subscribers, more members, whatever it may be on a platform or your newsletter, something like that? If you see things going in the right direction, you're doing the right thing.
That's such a good point. You know, we have a client who is in a really niche industry, and it's in the retail sector, really, really niche. And so I have to stay up to date on what's happening within retail, but not just retail operations, not just retail operations and environment design and merchandising. Like, I kind of stay up to date with this stuff, but I'm often downloading these the future of retail, the future of frictionless retail, 2023 trends, what's happening with the technology and all this stuff that my client doesn't touch and that frankly, I don't need to know, but it's important that I know. And what I find is large organizations are often putting out these types of pieces, these white papers, these downloads, these industry reports. They're really dense, they're really boring, and in my opinion, not very well done. And yet smaller businesses don't do any of this stuff. And I think it's because the large organizations hire like a market research firm and conduct their own research and do all of this stuff. But the opportunity I see for all of us is just to become curators. You know, if you go to an art gallery, often the person who's in charge of the art gallery is not making the art, they're curating the art. And if you come to a really great publication or even this podcast, right? I'm interviewing all of you to try and pick your brains for stuff, but I am curating the guests and I am curating the topic, but it's not my work. I'm stealing all of your work, John. So I always wonder why smaller and medium-sized businesses and even some larger businesses don't spend more time just collecting third-party data or other people's stuff or things that they see, or, you know, they come up with a new process that's a checklist where they found a way to do it in-house simpler. And like, there's all these things that we just do, and then we don't ever share. We don't ever package. We don't ever put out there. And they're super high value. And then even if we did this, more people would just give us their email address. They would give us their name. We could call them up or email them. And then on top of that, if we want to get really advanced, we could drop them in a remarketing campaign. And then because we know that they've already engaged with us, we can then start to remarket with them to give them more things and to more offers and just give them more and more and more. Why do you think people aren't doing this?
Part of it is fear of the unknown, fear of not performing well or doing it well, and resources. I mean, if you're talking about small to mid-sized businesses, the types of reports that I often download are much like what you were talking about, like Deloitte and McKinsey and, big, huge consulting companies or big National Association of Realtors, for instance, puts out a lot of data. But you can still do that, especially if you're in a niche market. And one of the best things I think you can do is be a storehouse of data. And you were mentioning this too about curated content, putting together data about stuff that matters to your industry. And, for instance, it could be like 28 cool facts about coffee, and you are a coffee distributor. And you may get a lot of traction out of that because nobody else is doing it quite like that. Or maybe, I worked at a self-storage marketplace, a startup, and we did a roundup of self-storage statistics. And eventually, major media outlets were citing our data because they didn't want to go find it themselves. So they would say, blah, 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 according to the name of the company. And that was great for us because usually we got a link back to our content. We got more traffic. We looked good. It gave us more brand authority. It gave us clout. And, those are some of the things you want with your content. You want to be able to build stature.
Such an interesting conversation. And I hate the fact that we keep this podcast so tight and short because I feel like I could talk to you all day. So I do have one more question, though. For you, what is your number one tip, your number one strategy, your number one piece of advice for anyone listening in terms of selling more?
That's a darn good question. So I would say when it comes to content marketing, do what works and get rid of what doesn't work. Don't spin your wheels. Don't spend your time on things that aren't generating results. And by that, I mean eyeballs or feedback from people, shares on social media, whatever it may be, and stick with things that do work well. And don't try to do everything. Don't try to be like, oh, we need to do blog posts and videos and infographics and blah, 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 blah. You can drive yourself crazy trying to do everything, unless you're a big company like Apple or Microsoft. Then you've got this gigantic team in-house and you've got agencies that can do all this stuff. But if you're a small to mid-sized business, you don't have those resources usually. And it's just really important to focus on what works and get rid of what doesn't. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about failing quickly. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over again just because you think, oh, we have to have this component of content. No, maybe that doesn't work for your audience, and it's never going to work for your audience. Stick with what works.
Okay, let's wrap up this conversation with our 3-point roundup. Number 1, content marketing builds trust and authority. John really emphasized in today's talk that we are really in super saturated markets and customers are more discerning than ever. And so they are really looking for brands that they can trust, people they can trust. And being consistent and providing high quality content helps establish your brand, your company, as not only reliable, but also trustworthy. Number 2, like anything that you do, strategic planning is vital to make your content marketing effective. So you need to understand your audience. You need to be able to understand where they are. You have to diversify your different content types because not every piece of content is going to resonate with every different person in your audience on every different platform. And to see what's working or not, you have to be able to measure and then adapt, cut what's not working, go all in on what is. And number 3, and this is really critical, content marketing is a long-term investment. And so you have to be patient, you have to be persistent, consistency is really key, and it helps if you build this, what would we call it, database, if you build this backlog, if you build this whole catalog of content, because over time, as you consistently make more and more content, you'll find that you'll be able to dip back into that collection and repurpose it or update it or reuse it, provide value in different ways for different audiences on different platforms in the future. This is one of those things where when you build the foundation, every step in the future becomes a little bit easier. And so I want to thank John Egan for joining us today. You can get his book, The Stripped Down Guide to Content Marketing, Success Secrets for Beginners, anywhere where books are sold. And if you want to learn more about John, head over to his website, johnegan.net. Now, at the same time, you could also head over to Instagram and give us a follow at Sales Loop Brand. And one last thing, if you've made it this far into the show, you should subscribe. Why is that? Well, Each week, I share practical strategies and tips, just like what we did with John, to supercharge your business growth and to boost your sales. With that, I'm Mark Drager, hopefully empowering you to shake up your sales game. I hope you keep listening, and I hope you keep selling. I'll catch you in the next one.